Hi everyone, my name is Jenny and I'm back today to do another video. Today I'll be talking through my January to March 2021 anticipated releases. There are quite a few of them on this list, so I'm not going to go into a ton of depth about any of them. I also have already posted a top 2021 anticipated releases for the first half of the year video, which I'll put a link to up in the cards above as well as in the description box below. I go into depth about, as I said, my top 2021 releases in that video, some of which I will briefly mention here, but be sure to check out that video if you want to see the books that I'm truly the most excited for in 2021. These ones include some that I have Necklace arcs of that I'm intrigued about, as well as just books that have kind of caught my eye that I'm interested in learning more about. So as I said, I'm not going to talk a ton about any of these books, but if any of them sound interesting to you, I have a Goodreads shelf of all these books down in the description box below if you want to check them out and read more about them. So jumping right in, the first book comes out on the 5th of January, and that is Picnic in the Ruins by Todd Robert Peterson. This is coming out from Counterpoint Press and is a thriller about an anthropologist in the American West who I believe is uncovering some artifacts and some nefarious things ensue. This one I am worried it'll be a bit culturally appropriative, particularly given that from what I understand Peterson is a white man. However, it's published by Counterpoint, which is a pretty solid press, so I'm intrigued about this one and definitely want to hear more buzz about it before I dig into it. Then the next one comes out on the 12th of January and is one that I have an early copy of through NetGalley, which is Summer Water by Sarah Moss. In the United States, this one is coming out from FSG and is a novella from Moss, who I've read previously, and honestly I'm not entirely sure why I requested this because I read Ghostwall by Sarah Moss and only gave it 3.5 stars, and then I heard about Summer Water from Mercedes at Mercy's Bookish Musings and she also only gave it 3.5 stars, but I'm intrigued about the themes that this one is exploring, as it is set on, I believe, a lake in the United Kingdom that has a bunch of summer houses and a bunch of people are staying there. However, it's a really rainy weekend and I believe tensions kind of rise as one of the families, who I believe is from Eastern Europe, is beginning to feel more and more unsafe because of the other families that are there. So I think there's going to be interesting themes of immigration and discussion of that, particularly surrounding Brexit and who should be allowed to be in the United Kingdom. So I'm intrigued about this one quite a lot, and I do have an early copy, as I said, so I'll be reading this one potentially even before the end of the year. So the next one comes out on the 19th of January, which seems to be the first day that publishing is really starting to get its gears grinding, which is another novella by Nnedi Okorafor, which is called Remote Control. This one is out from Tor, and I really know nothing about this except that it's by Nnedi Okorafor. It is an amazing cover, and I really like her work. I like her novellas, so I'm definitely intrigued about this one. Then also on the 19th of January, we have another book that I have an early copy of, which is The Broken Spine by Dorothy St. James. This one is a debut novel in a new cozy mystery series coming out from Berkeley, and it's set in a very high-tech library, I believe, and some of the books begin to go missing. So it sounds really fun and cozy. I love books set in libraries. That seems really fun, and I'm excited about getting to this one again, potentially before the end of the year, but if not, at the very beginning of 2021. Then finally, also on the 19th of January, we have The Rib King by Lady Hubbard. This one is published by Amistad and it's been really hyped up on Book Riot, and I believe it's been compared to Parasite, which I have not seen Parasite, but I do know the story. It's basically kind of like upstairs downstairs situation, and I believe this is about a family of black servants that work in a white household, and I believe this one is also historical if I'm not mistaken, and it sounds intriguing. Then on the 26th of January we have two releases, the first of which is one of my top 2021 releases, which is Bride of the Sea by Iman Quota. This one is out from Tin House and is a literary fiction novel about a Saudi Arabian couple and their familial troubles after they have a daughter, but then shortly after that get divorced and they go their separate paths for several decades. Then also on the 26th of January we have The X Talk by Rachel Lynn Solomon. This one is coming out from Berkeley and is about two exes who are on a radio show together and I believe kind of rekindle their love for one another through this radio show. Then on February 2nd we have a lot of new releases, the first of which is Four Lost Cities, A Secret History of the Urban Age by Annalee Newitz, and this is out from W.W. Norton, and Newitz is actually a science fiction writer previously. I believe she may also be a journalist or a professor. She has one of those two professions and I can't remember which one, but this is a nonfiction book from her about 4 major urban environments of history that have been kind of forgotten through time. So I'm super intrigued about that. I do love history and I love the history of urban areas, so this one seems right up my alley. Then also on the 2nd of February, we have The Survivors by Jane Harper, which is the latest mystery by Jane Harper, which I've now, since putting it in my top 2021 releases, have heard some mixed things about. So I'm going to go into this one with trepidation. But I don't know that much about it, except I believe it follows a brother who goes missing and his sister is maybe trying to find him. I also have 2 short story collections through NetGalley that are also both coming out on February 2nd. The first of which is Milk Blood Peat by Dantiel Moniz. This is out from Grove Atlantic. It's a short story collection that is set among the cities and suburbs of Florida about characters who, quote, find themselves confronted by extraordinary moments of violent personal reckoning. I don't know what that means, but I love this cover and I'm very intrigued about it, and as I said, I do have an early copy of this one. I also have an early copy of Land of Big Numbers by T. Ping Chen. This is out from Mariner and is a short story collection about, quote, the diverse and legion Chinese people, their history, their government, and how all of that has tumbled into the present. I'm very intrigued about this one as I have some knowledge of China, obviously, as it is a hugely important global power these days, but I'm intrigued to hear a female perspective on that, as I feel like that's not something I get a lot of. Also on February 2nd, another one of my top 2021 releases, we have 400 Souls, A Community History of African America 1619 to 2019, edited by Ibram X. Kendi and Keisha N. Blaine, and as it says on the subtitle of this one, is a collected history of African Americans from their first arrival to the United States or the American continent all the way to the present day. Then the last February 2nd release is actually one that's on its way to me because it was one of the December picks for Book of the Month, which is This Close to Okay by Lisa Cross Smith. This is coming out from Grand Central, and Lisa Cross Smith is an author I've read from before. She writes pretty hard-hitting adult contemporaries is what I would say. They have a tinge of romance to them, but they lean more, I'd say, to focusing on kind of larger issues of like grief and sometimes psychological trauma, which I think is the focus of this one. This one is about a Black woman who is a therapist who actually saves a white man from committing suicide by jumping off a bridge, and I believe they have a weekend together of kind of reconciliation. So super intrigued about this one, and definitely will be getting to it since I do have a copy that will someday be arriving to me. My Book of the Month box is very delayed. Then moving on to the 9th of February, we have 2 releases, the first of which is another one that I have an early copy of, which is Rerun the Tides by Vindela Vida. This one is also one I talked about in my 2021 releases, and it's out from Echo, and it's a coming-of-age story that's part mystery set in the 1980s in San Francisco about 2 teenage girls. So intrigued about this one. We'll definitely be talking about it before its release date on the 9th. Also on the 9th, we have Fireheart Tiger by Alette de Bodard. I believe that's how you say her name. This is coming out from Tor and is another novella. This one's set in pre-colonial Vietnam. And frankly, that's all I needed to know. I believe there's a female-female romance, or at least female-female love interests, so I'm intrigued about that element of this one as well. Then moving on to the 16th of February, we also have 2 releases, the first of which is also one that I have from NetGalley, and that's The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together by Heather McGee. McGee is a political analyst, and this one is coming out from One World, and it's a nonfiction book about the economic costs of racism for all Americans, not just Black Americans or non-white Americans. So super intrigued about that idea and excited to be digging into this one at the beginning of the new year. Also on February 16th, I'm excited about A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. This is coming out from Bloomsbury and is apparently the next Court of Thorns and Roses book. I did read all of the Court of Thorns and Roses books, I think back in 2017, and I was very into them. Sarah J. Maas basically just writes fantasy romance. I've enjoyed it. It's pretty trashy. It's probably about the trashiest thing that I read and like publicly enjoy, so I'm intrigued about this. I don't know when I will get to it, to be perfectly honest. Also, this covers absolutely one of the ugliest things I've ever seen, but I am kind of keeping my eye on this one and see what other people, because obviously everyone on BookTube is going to read this because Sarah J. Maas is just one of those authors that people here on BookTube love, so I'll definitely keep my eye on this one and probably read it at some point, maybe during the summer when I just need a book that will kind of pick me up, and Sarah J. Maas can usually do that for me. On February 23rd, we have 2 more releases, the first of which is yet again one that I have an early copy of through NetGalley, and this is Love at First by Kate Claiborne. This is coming out from Kensington, and I really enjoy Kate Claiborne. I've read 2 of her Chance of a Lifetime or Luck of the Lifetime, I don't remember what that series is called, but they all have luck in the title, and I've really enjoyed them quite a lot. I think she writes really strong independent characters that have very realistic conflicts in my mind that are prohibiting them from being together. So I've really enjoyed that quite a lot. This is the second in I think a different series from her, although it might be a standalone, and I think it might have some like Romeo and Juliet elements as well. So intrigued about this one. We'll definitely be reading it pretty close to Valentine's Day, I think is my plan. And then the other book that I'm intrigued about on February 23rd is called Infinite Country, and this is by Patricia Engel and is coming out from Avid Reader Press. And this is a literary fiction novel about a Colombian family that is facing deportation. I'm not entirely sure where they are, if they're in the United States or if they are elsewhere, but I do know that deportation and immigration are big themes of this novel. Then moving into March, on March 2nd, I also have 2 early copies through NetGalley of 2 releases that I'm excited about. The first of which is The Conductors by Nicole Glover. This is out from Mariner Books and is yet again one that I talked about in my 2021 anticipated releases big video. And this is part fantasy novel, part historical fiction, part mystery, set immediately after the Civil War in Philadelphia, and follows a former Underground Railroad conductor who now solves crimes in the Philadelphia area. So this one sounds super fun. I love the cover of this one, and as I said, I do have an early copy of it. I also have an early copy of a kind of random pick that I just requested on a whim, which is American Cider, A Modern Guide to a Historic Beverage by Dan Pucci and Craig Cavallo. This one is out from Ballantine Books and is a nonfiction book, I believe, about hard cider. I'm intrigued about that. I do like hard cider, and I really enjoyed Barrel Aged Stout and Selling Out earlier this year, as I think the history and the machinations of the beer spirits world is very interesting. So I'm hoping this one will also kind of fill that niche of like an interest in a very specific history. So I do have this one, and we'll be reading this one before its publication date as well. Then on the 9th of March, I have several releases, the first of which I actually have a physical copy of, and I will be talking about in January, which is How Beautiful We Were by Mbolo Mbui. This is coming out from Random House and is a literary fiction novel about environmentalism and neocolonialism in a fictional African village that has an American oil company that is present within the community. So super intrigued about this one, and we'll be reading it very soon. Also on March 9th, we have The Seed Keeper by Diane Wilson. Wilson is a member of the Dakota Nation, and this one is coming out from Milkweed Edition and is a family saga about a Dakota family and a young woman who goes into the foster care system, I believe in Minnesota, after her father dies when she is a child. And then later, as an adult, she returns to her childhood home in the woods where she and her father grew up. So intrigued about this one. We'll be reading it hopefully shortly around its publication date. Then also on the 9th of March, we have Beloved Beasts, Fighting for Life in an Age of Extinction. This one is by Michelle Nishuis. I have no idea how you would say her last name, which is coming out from W.W. Norton. This author is a writer for The Atlantic, and I usually like The Atlantic's writers. I think they have a lot of very strong writers on their staff. And this is a nonfiction book about the history of the conservation movement, beginning in the 19th century, I believe, and moving until the present day, which I'm very familiar with a lot of the science and the history of scientific ideas within the conservation movement, but I'll be intrigued to see it written from less of a kind of science journal perspective and more of a lay person's perspective. So intrigued about this one quite a bit. And then also on the 9th of March, we have The Arsonist City by Hala Alyan. This is out by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, and this is another family saga written by a Palestinian-American author who I actually believe wrote Salt Houses, which I've not read, but I've heard interesting things here on BookTube about a family with a Syrian mother, a Lebanese father, and 3 American children who all return to Beirut, which is where their family home is, and I believe some events have to happen and secrets have to be uncovered, as with most family sagas. So intrigued about that one. Then on the 16th of March, I also have 3 releases, the first of which is A Place Like Mississippi, A Journey Through a Real and Imagined Landscape. This is by Ralph Eubanks. It is coming out from Timber Press, and I heard about this one through the Southern Foodways Alliance, which is a think tank / institute center out of Ole Miss, and basically promotes and archives the history of Southern food culture. So I'm a big fan of theirs. I really like a lot of their work. I love their podcast, and I also earlier this year read The Potlicker Papers, which was written by one of the co-founder / director of the Southern Foodways Alliance, and they were really hyping this book up. It sounds like it's kind of theory-based, but it's also a like history of the literary landscape of Mississippi, which is a place that while is part of the South, and I am very familiar with the South, I'm not very familiar with Mississippi as a place and kind of complexifying my ideas about Mississippi, so I'm very intrigued about this one. Another one that also kind of piqued my interest in terms of having some ideas and themes that are ones that are really relevant to my interests. We have Uprooted, Recovering the Legacy of the Places We've Left Behind by Grace Olmsted. This is out from Centennial and is apparently part memoir and part investigative history of Olmsted's ancestral Idaho, where she left upon graduating from high school and has not since returned, and it's basically kind of ruminations about place and the places we leave behind and what impact that has on successful people leaving these places, thereby leaving those who were unable to leave for whatever reason behind and no one else. So I find that idea to be really thought-provoking and fascinating, and I'm intrigued to read a book that's kind of touching on those topics. Then finally, the last book that I have coming out on the 16th of March that I'm intrigued about is Soul Lanterns by Shaw Kozuki. And this is by Delacorte Press, and I believe it's a translated middle grade about a young girl living in Hiroshima learning about the bombings during World War II. I believe she lives in the present day, or at least in the more recent past than the 1940s, and so she's first learning about the atomic bomb and its impacts it had on her community, which sounds intriguing. I also don't think I've ever heard of a translated middle grade, so I'm definitely intrigued about at least hearing more about this one from other people. Then finally, I just have two books on the 23rd of March, both of which I'm very intrigued about. The first of which is The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke, which is coming out from Orbit, and I actually have an early copy of this one as well. And this is a new debut adult fantasy series set in North Africa that I believe follows a soldier and a princess, both of whom are women, and they have a romance of some sort over the course of the three novels. So I'm intrigued about this one. I don't know a ton else about it, but I do like this cover, and I do like reading fantasy set in places that are not based on Western Europe, so definitely looking forward to getting into this one. And then last but not least, also on March 23rd, we have Red Island House by Andrea Lee. This is coming out from Scribner and is another one I talked about in that top 2021 releases video. That's a literary fiction novel set in Madagascar that follows a female African-American professor and her Italian husband as they build a house in Madagascar, and I believe begin to uncover and understand more of the kind of culture of Madagascar as a place, which I've been very intrigued about Madagascar for quite a while, so I'm excited to read a book set there. So that was pretty quick getting through all of these books. As I said, I was not going to go into a ton of depth, but if any of these books are ones that do sound interesting to you, as I said, a Goodreads shelf will be linked down in the description box below, so you can check any of these out and learn more about them if that is something that interests you. Additionally, if you've found my channel through this video, I'd love to have you stick around and subscribe. I hope you're having a great rest of your day whenever you watch this, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.